Perspecsys. My name is Stephanie Bailey, and today we're going to talk about what is a cloud data protection gateway and how does it reduce risk. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. First, this webinar will be recorded. You'll receive a link to the recording and presentation within 2 business days following this webcast. Second, all attendees are in listen-only mode. If you do have a question during the session, please enter them in the Q&A section of your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of the session. And lastly, this webinar is best viewed in full screen mode. So let's get started. Joining me today is Ernie Megazzini from Tech Mahindra and Gerry Grealish from Perspecsys. Ernie leads the Center of Excellence at Tech Mahindra, as well as strategic planning and solutions architecture functions, and plays a key role in working with clients in developing strategies to drive business and information technology forward. Ernie is a recognized industry expert in helping companies transform their businesses utilizing cloud computing solutions from Salesforce, Informatica, Amazon, Google, and a myriad of other app exchange partners. He is a subject matter expert in industries such as financial services, telecom, manufacturing, and high tech. Gerry is Chief Marketing Officer at Perspecsys and is responsible for defining and executing Perspecsys' marketing and product vision. He is a frequent author and speaker on cloud data security issues across industry events and publications, as well as a member of the IAPP and the Cloud Security Alliance. First, just a quick overview of the agenda. Ernie's going to take us through an overview of the evolution of cloud data protection, and then he's going to define what a cloud data protection gateway is and the role they play in cloud security. From there, Gerry's going to do a deeper dive into cloud data protection gateway technology and explain how to use encryption and tokenization to protect public clouds, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Here are some of the key takeaways we hope you get from today's session. First, gain a better understanding of what cloud data protection gateways are and why they have evolved in the space. Second, steps and safeguards you can put in place when implementing a public cloud application. And lastly, how to leverage cloud data protection gateways and the role they play in preserving the functionality of a cloud application. So Ernie, pass it off to you. Let's get started.
Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Ernie Megazzini with Tech Mahindra. And I'd like to just start around some of the market pains and drivers that initiated the need for cloud data protection gateways. And you can see on the slide, and you know this from your daily news feed or from your RSS feed, blogs, forums, discussions, and groups about all of the quote-unquote breaches of data at financial services companies, consumer banks, retail banks, etc. And that is really what is driving the need for advanced cloud data protection gateways. Because as people migrate over to cloud applications, basically what they do is they have unique and new requirements when you put your data up in the cloud. So for those of us who've been in the technology business for a long time, we used to have private frame relay networks. We would have private LAN network. We would have all sorts of virtualization that we could protect. But when the data goes up into the cloud, now you have, for example, with Salesforce.com, you'll have the need to support multi-tenancy. And because of those changes, we've introduced the idea of this cloud protection security gateway. So next. So those drivers are always around the changes in data protection policies within countries. So for example, we have Singapore, Australia, Canada, where there are actual policies in place that says that sensitive data cannot pass their borders. And that data residency option is very challenging. So for example, Salesforce.com is now building data centers in Canada and will alleviate a portion of their data residency issues in the sensitivity of data for those customers in Canada. Then there's industry compliance. So for example, HIPAA within the healthcare industry, GLBA within financial services, ITAR within the defense contracting and manufacturing industries, PCI within retail industries. So there are industry compliance rules and regulations that are driving new and interesting requirements around data protection, and most specifically for those people who use cloud-based applications, how their data is protected within the cloud. And then third is, a lot of companies, mandate their own internal security and put in privacy policies and issues around confidentiality and infrastructure related to customer data. And for those companies that choose to run their own policy and have their own internal security, there's also a driver for those companies when they place their data in the cloud to have a solution around cloud data protection. Next. And so a cloud data protection gateway, for those of us, who've been in the technology industry for a while, we can say that, some of our data has been in the cloud, very, very early in the telecommunication space because we had the PSTN cloud, we had an asynchronous transfer mode cloud, and all the telcos participated, quote unquote, in cloud-based services. But now we've gotten to the application side of the business, and so when we have an application such as Salesforce.com, we have a multi-tenant model. We don't have standalone instances that we can protect. We now have to protect our own individual instance of the application for our customers and for our infrastructure. Another reference that I'd like to talk about, for those of you who are familiar, you kind of get an idea as an analogy for what is called the RIM relay, research in motion, as a gateway with 2 outbound ports, no inbound ports, and is still, the single most secure mobile network in the globe today. And so that same concept of having a gateway where we can actually intercept traffic. So for example, when Salesforce moves its data up into the cloud from your data load, at that point we're going to actually intercept the data through a gateway, and then that gateway in transit is going to protect the data. At rest, it's going to protect the data. It's going to protect data whether it's coming in from mobile users or from on-premise users. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to manage a set of keys from the software service or from the platform service, as an example with Salesforce.com, and then ultimately becomes a much larger set of services that are wrapped around this concept of CASB, which is Cloud Access Security Brokers. Next. So when I started, and I've been around this ecosystem, for example, with Salesforce.com for 15 years, we basically had very early stage, development going on, and we had very proprietary encryption methods to preserve functionality. And in the old days, we had 128-bit advanced encryption services that were offered by Salesforce.com native to their platform. But that was, again, only on those standard objects, standard attributes that came from Salesforce.com out of the box. And what has happened is that we've basically had this trade-off occur as the technology has matured, where there is functionality and security for every field. So for those of you who are Salesforce customers, you know that you have field-level security for whatever you put into Salesforce.com. But then there is the actual security in the cloud when you actually move all your data into those fields that you configure. And in the first generation of these gateways, which I've had a great deal of experience with, it would basically, for example, when you would tokenize a field, so that would be you actually place a token in a field, and then that token basically goes up to a key. It basically encrypts that field, and it doesn't allow for anybody anywhere to be able to read the data in that particular field. But what happens is that at that point you actually have what's called field expansion. The token can become too large to actually allow you to enter the value in that field, and then that ultimately breaks search, it breaks reporting, it breaks workflow, and many other important functions that you would use would be rendered useless. And then where I have deployed for defense contractors in manufacturing businesses who are subject to ITAR, it is not a viable option because there are too many breaks in functionality within the application, and there's not enough disclaiming of information along the business process path for it to be very successful. Next. So as an example, for a social media company who's a Salesforce.com customer, when the government is searching for data specific to terrorism or any other very bad scenario, and the government is looking to subpoena data when they see social posting or blogging or RSS feeds or forums or discussion groups, the customer actually wanted to be able to encrypt the data so that if Salesforce.com were to receive a blind subpoena from a government agency who's doing the casework, that Salesforce.com would not be held liable because the data would actually be encrypted, and Salesforce, even in a blind subpoena, would not be able to turn over any data to that agency that was doing that particular casework. So it was a very important business process for the social media company, and given the nature of the technology changes and the advancements in social media, the privacy of information is obviously a challenge for a lot of companies, and this was a perfect solution in the first generation, and within the second generation actually has been able to provide additional features and functions without breaking some of the native functionality that the application brings. Another one, within the global banking system, obviously information, from a bank becomes very sensitive. Personally identifiable information, the Patriot Act, the Basel II Accord, many other compliance and regulatory agencies around the banking industry, information that is personally identifiable, not being able to pass the border of a country as an example, or for an investment bank that has businesses across multiple geographies and having Chinese wall challenges, not being able to move data across from one business unit to another. The first generation gateway platforms had a great deal of difficulty in being able to serve multiple instances that are tied to one another, and instances that go across multiple geographies. It was ultimately deployable, but again, the functionality and reporting, workflow, process, et cetera, was very much a challenge. And then in the defense contracting space, as an example, there are regulations around ITAR that require that information not be passed at all, even if it was a partner or a customer, and all of the components that are associated with the actual manufacture of a particular solution were also very much exposed. And in the case that we worked on, we had to make sure that we actually disclaimed all of the data anomalies as we went through the business process to each of the individual users, and then ultimately had to go break functionality in order to meet the security needs of the customer, and that was a challenge to the end users because that functionality break was a very difficult thing for them to have to manage every day. Next. So now we have the next generation. So as with everything else in the technology world, we are moving at a relatively fast pace, and the first generation has obviously led to the second generation, and Perspecsys has a really nice document from a company called Coalfire that actually wrote a security review and assessment around the technology. And so now we have very well vetted approaches from all of the established vendors, so everybody's moving to the new gateway technology. We've also been able to preserve the functionality of the application instead of breaking the functionality of the application in order to be able to either tokenize or encrypt data from the application, as well as the improvement around latency, because again, everything being in the cloud, you have a bunch of hops that you have to make in order to connect all the pieces and parts, and so latency issues have been reduced and performance has improved, as well as interoperability being improved within the architecture, so extending yourself out to App Exchange apps, within the environment with Salesforce.com, and I've been working, for example, with Perspecsys on one around big machines. There are a lot of improvements around interoperability and the ability to capture web services and be able to create adapters to the Cloud Data Protection Gateway. Next. So the big things to look for, it's kind of a gotcha type of a thing, so make sure that that you've identified the key management structure, process. How do they generate the key? How are the key groups managed? What periods is the cryptography applied to that individual key group? And then all the best practices and standards around cryptographic best practice. Make sure that you're concentrating not only on the support for the data in motion, but even more importantly, the support for the data at rest. And then, for example, if you were moving off to Amazon Web Services from Salesforce.com, also how you would deal with the support for data in the cloud. And then tokenization support is also very important to consider when looking at the technologies. Again, these tokens, as the first generation has moved to the second generation, there's been dramatic improvement in the payload and how the payload is processed with the token between the cloud application and the cloud protection security gateway. So that's a very important thing to consider when considering the technology. And then multi-platform and multi-org support. So, for example, there are many customers within the Salesforce ecosystem that have multiple orgs and serve not only the out-of-the-box functionality from Salesforce, but also build custom functionality on the platform. So you can have multiple orgs, you can have platform applications, you can have app exchange applications, all running simultaneously within one environment. And so it's very critical to understand how the vendor would be able to integrate with that. And then the ability to connect via web services. So for those of you in the business for a while, you understand that we live in a web services world, and the ability to be able to speak to a web service is critically important because that allows you the flexibility to be able to go out to multiple cloud-based applications, or whether you have one standalone cloud-based application and it isn't talking to Salesforce.com, as an example, the ability to be able to have Perspecsys connect directly to that application is critically important. And then you can see all the gotchas on the right-hand side. Again, a lot of the vendors have proprietary encryption. You obviously want to avoid that. You don't want to increase latency because as it is, you're already in the cloud and you're relying upon fault-tolerant points along the path to Salesforce.com. You want to make sure that you don't just concentrate on data at rest, but data at movement. And then remembering that you can impact functionality when you apply encryption, and obviously you don't want to hurt functionality and your end users. And then make sure that you are going to get the appropriate amount of application support when you implement a security solution, and make sure that you don't break all the dashboards and reporting because there are some limitations within Salesforce when you apply tokenization in that particular case. So that's a really quick view. I'm limiting my time here so that we can have more time for questions and answers at the end. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Grealish, who is running the marketing solutions at Perspecsys and who is going to dive deeper into the technology. Jerry?
Thanks, Ernie. Appreciate it, and thanks for the overview. And as Ernie just mentioned, I'm going to take the next bit of time here in the webcast and just give a little bit more of a deeper dive on the technology, and then share some use cases that I think will be interesting to the audience about how people can apply and use the gateway to bring very sensitive and very regulated data into public cloud environments. And we're seeing more and more people pushing the envelope about what sorts of data, what medical data, healthcare data, ITAR data, as Ernie mentioned, putting that out into cloud environments thanks to the benefits of these next generation gateways. So just a bit of a quick recap just to set the context. On the right-hand side, as Ernie mentioned, these gateways are typically a couple key drivers. There's going to be folks that are dealing with data residency, also called data sovereignty. I hear it called that quite a bit in the Asia-Pacific region. And this is going to be in situations where, again, data just cannot cross a border. We're seeing more and more regulations and international privacy laws popping up, partially because of the Snowden effect, with some of the increased surveillance, where countries are being very specific now on citizen-related data, it not being transferred outside of a border without some real significant data protection requirements being put in place. And often the cloud providers are unwilling to provide SLAs that will adhere with that. Control, this is another a big thing. It's kind of a pseudonym for security in situations where an organization just feels like, hey, I've invested a ton of money in expertise and technology to keep my own environment secure. The data that's most precious to me, my sensitive data, I want to keep inside of my own firewalls, right? And then the last one, privacy, also a bit of a catch-all for compliance. This is going to be in situations where a sector has some specific guidelines, HIPAA, et cetera, as Ernie mentioned. And the industries on the left-hand side, no surprise, these tend to be more of the regulated industries. And because of that, these are the folks that are really leading the way in terms of adoption of these gateways. Just wanted to mention on manufacturing for defense sector in particular, thanks to some recent work that Perspecsys did with the Department of State, for those that are working on products on the U.S. munitions list, subject to ITAR, we've been able to work with them to specify the use of tokenization as an appropriate technique to protect ITAR-governed data. So for those folks that have an interest in this particular space, just contact me afterwards. My contact information is at the end. I'm not going to do much of a dive on that here, but I can provide some additional information afterwards directly. So just a bit about kind of how this solution works at more of a high level, 10,000 feet. I've broken it into 3 steps that I call needs, policies, and deployment. And just to kind of make it real, let's just say in area 1 needs, let's just say maybe it's a healthcare company and it's trying to comply with HIPAA guidelines. So there's a set of patient information that needs to be treated in a specific way. And let's say they want to deploy FIPS 140-2 encryption against the HIPAA-governed fields. So the privacy and the compliance folks would specify that these data types need to be treated in a certain way, again, encrypted with a special form of an encryption algorithm. Then in step 2, the security team will take those guidelines from the governance and data privacy people and say, okay, I need to now instantiate those in the gateway. So through a GUI-based interface, they would then use some drop-down sort of interfaces to apply data protection policies to those specific data attributes. So maybe PHI encrypted, any attachments would need to be encrypted, maybe I tokenize description fields, those sorts of things. So those policies are created, and then in step 3, those are then deployed into a runtime environment where the gateway is in essence intercepting the traffic going out to cloud environments and ensuring that those policies are being put in place. So any information that goes beyond the firewall, in transit, at rest, and then also while it's being processed in the cloud would be protected per the policies, again, encryption, tokenization, et cetera. And then on the way back in, as I'll describe in the next slide, the gateway brings it back into clear text form. So the end users should be none the wiser that this is going on. They think they're just interfacing directly to the cloud application of their choice and being able to use it to its full beneficial use. So in this couple of slides, I'm just going to go through a bit of a data flow. Hopefully the animation works here over kind of the webcast connection. But let's just say on the left-hand side, I'm creating a new record in the cloud that Ernie mentioned, Salesforce. So in that situation, the end user then would hit enter. The information would flow to the gateway. The gateway would then instantiate these policies that I referenced. So let's just say that first name, last name, and email address will be replaced with either ciphertext or tokens. That information then is stored in the gateway, and then what's sent to Salesforce is the replacement information. And then on the way back in, let's say somebody calls that record back up, the tokens and the encrypted value come back into the gateway. The gateway will then perform the function of marrying it back up to the original data, and then that data is presented back to the end user in all of its original form. So again, the data flow is such that the end user doesn't know that this is going on. They can still have the full functionality, but the enterprise knows that the regulated, the controlled, the sensitive data never truly leaves their environment. So then just another look at kind of making the concept clear. In this particular example, let's say I'm an internal authorized user to be able to use this particular cloud. I have the ability to access the cloud via the Perspecsys solution here. It's called the Apotex Gateway. On the left-hand side, I can actually see all the information on this account, Vestige Tech, in all of its clarity. On the right-hand side, if somebody was to come in, either somehow they got access to the information, whether it be somebody within the cloud provider themselves, or in Ernie's example, somebody who's an unauthorized third party, the information was handed over to them, you'll see that what they would see is a mix of some information in the clear, like the account owner says David Stott. That's because the account owner policy was set to just let that information pass through in the clear. But some of the other detail, the protection policies, were to actually either encrypt or tokenize it, so that information, as you see, remains in either encrypted or tokenized form. Now, if it's encryption, in the way that we've deployed it with the Perspecsys gateway, the enterprise owns those encryption keys, right? They physically own them. So it's not even an example where some cloud providers might provide you an HSM in the cloud. In that instance, physically the keys are still with somebody else. In the Perspecsys gateway, given the way that we've architected it, those keys are actually going to remain with the client. If tokenization is used, the token vault, which then maps the original value to the token value, again, that remains with the customer. Next slide starts to just pivot a bit to talk about some of the things that our customers have told us are critical for the cloud data control gateways to provide. And a lot of these then have led to the kind of the next generation sort of approach that Ernie described, where you need the ability to be able to do these things to truly satisfy the enterprise requirement of providing the security they need, but giving them the full richness of the cloud environment that they're trying to adopt. So the first one is this idea of securing the information with the strongest possible techniques. It is a cloud security solution at its core. So trying to provide some proprietary encryption that will make the job easier of preserving some of the functionality, the second point, is a path that many folks have gone down. But we believe, and I think Ernie shared the same sentiment, that any sort of solution that sacrifices on the core principle of the security of the underlying encryption or tokenization techniques should not be able to pass muster at the enterprise level. So you need to be able to provide strong security that is well vetted and accepted by the enterprise class customer, but also then be able to be as invisible to the end user experience, the second bullet, as possible. The last area is a bit of a catch-all, but for those that have sold software and solutions to enterprises, you know that they have a very demanding set of criteria in terms of being able to meet their very demanding data center environment. So scalability, resiliency, the ability to interoperate with technologies that they've already invested in and are trained on. Those are all very important things, because if you think about it, in some of our instances, we have thousands and thousands of users that are coming through our gateway infrastructure, accessing cloud environments that are very mission critical for these enterprises. So the ability to be able to be enterprise class is a critical part of the evaluation of these sorts of gateways. So then a bit of, how does Perspecsys do this then? Because as I mentioned before, some of these, what Ernie calls first generation gateways, they sort of took shortcuts with the strength of the security, with some kind of, with less random forms of encryption or less random forms of tokenization that still left patterns in the data to allow the cloud to be able to preserve some level of functionality. And our team, as we looked at the challenge, we said, if security is the first principle, put that out there, saying your marker is going to be extremely strong tokenization or encryption capabilities, for example, and then determine what level or what aspects of the cloud environment will be impacted by you putting strong ciphertext or strong tokens out in that environment, and then build into the gateway a set of capabilities that will basically offset for that. So an example, let's say, would be search. As Ernie mentioned before, search is one of the things that people use day in, day out within their cloud applications. So what Perspecsys has in its gateway is a set of capabilities with indices and database work that allows for more of a hybrid search model across a hybrid cloud data protection approach. So things that are encrypted strongly or tokenized strongly, that search actually happens locally in the database. Elements that can be searched in the cloud because they were put out there in the clear, those are searched in the cloud, and then the gateway brings back the solutions into a combined view for the user that's accessing the cloud environment. That's just one example. There's other things like reporting, email, dashboards that need to be considered as well. But because of this approach that we took, where there's a set of capabilities in the gateway, it allows us to bring, for instance, with search, the full set of search grammar into the equation that we preserve. So things, as I point out in the slide, begins with searches, ends with, contains, operators like and or. All of those are things that people that do cloud applications like myself, you use those day in, day out to get to the information you need in these cloud applications. So our view was and is that if you break those sorts of things, you're really kind of perverting that cloud experience for the enterprise. And because of that, it was completely antithetical to our design approach, which is the reason why we took the architectural approach that we did. And then a little bit about the underlying techniques. I said, hey, first principle is really the strength of the security you're providing the enterprise. So what we do is we have two different, at a high level, two different approaches that we offer. Tokenization, which aligns very well with the data residency, data sovereignty sort of driver that I mentioned earlier. And the reason that's the case is that if you think about, for those that are familiar with the tokenization concept, that there's multiple ways to generate a token. Some can use more of a mathematical hashing function where there is a mathematical relationship. But Perspecsys took the approach of actually designing the surrogate tokens with the strongest form that PCI SSC references, which is more of a kind of a sequential approach where there's no mathematical link between the token and the original value. And because there's no mathematical link, that really plays well for those that are trying to satisfy the spirit of the requirements around data residency and data sovereignty. The token vault, as I mentioned before, which maps the original value to the token, that actually remains in country in the organization's enterprise if that's where they want it to remain. And because of that, we have found that more often than not, organizations really like tokenization as a technique when data residency or sovereignty is in play. And again, our approach was to have an outside auditor, Coalfire in this particular example, assess the solution against the most rigorous guidelines out there on tokenization, which are in the PCI space in the payment card industry. And then on the encryption side, what we went down the path on and it's proven to be successful is the idea of being able to use other encryption technologies, almost like a plug-in sort of approach into our gateway. So we have customers that have standardized on voltage, customers that have standardized on SafeNet, RSA as an example, and key management technologies from Talos and SafeNet, et cetera. They want to be able to use those investments in a complementary fashion with Perspecsys. So as opposed to writing our own proprietary crypto and trying to use that as the foundation for us being able to provide a gateway solution, our approach is to leverage third-party approaches that are well vetted, well understood, have gone through in-depth security reviews as a way of being able to provide the best form of encryption capabilities for our customers. And we can leverage also some of the standard AES 256 capabilities that are part of the Java solution, which are free of charge. So customers can use the preferred modules or the standard stuff within the Java stack. But at the end of the day, for them it's important that it's well vetted, well proven, and it's something that they have a level of comfort with, especially in those industries that I mentioned before where there's third-party assessors and auditors that come in and look at their own approaches. So the ability to point to well-proven, well-accepted techniques is provides a lot of benefit for those folks. The last point I just wanted to mention on some of the technology is this idea of being able to support flexible deployment options. And one of the things that Ernie had mentioned before is kind of multi-tenant, multi-cloud, et cetera. So core to our proposition is being very multi, and multi in the sense of if people have multiple orgs of, let's say, a particular cloud, we can support that with a single gateway instance. If people want to use multiple clouds across a single instance, they can do that. So ServiceNow, Salesforce, et cetera. But also if people want to be able to use a single instance and it be multi-tenant, that's a capability that we built out as well. And a use case in that situation would be where our managed service providers, depicted on the right-hand side of this slide, they're providing what's called a local data residency as a service capability. So, for instance, in Germany or Canada, Australia, where the guiding driver is that the data remain in the country and not cross a border, as opposed to the data has to stay in my own data center. We have partners that can provision a solution, the Perspecsys solution, a single instance of Perspecsys, to support multiple clients in that particular geography. And they're able to then prove to the auditors and the assessors and the regulatory parties that the information is remaining in the country. And it's interesting, some of the cloud providers have gone down the path of trying to build out local data centers in different countries to meet some of these requirements. But what they've found is that even though, let's say, I built a data center in Germany, the backup data center is in France. So customers determine that in the SLA, it shows that the cloud provider has the right to move that data into a different country to provide the SLA attributes that they're signing up to. So even though a local data center might be there, when they look at the fine print, they find that, okay, it may not solve my data sovereignty requirement. So what Perspecsys has done here with some of our partners is that we have a great solution for that allows them to use the cloud they want regardless of where it's located. A couple of use cases that really kind of struck me as I was thinking about this webinar that I wanted to share, just to show people kind of the art of the possible on what these gateways are now permitting. I picked a couple around Salesforce, which is one of the clouds that we support, because it really kind of shows some of the more aggressive mission-critical applications that people are starting to build on a cloud platform that traditionally was more of a CRM or Salesforce automation, but now being used in kind of very cool ways, quite frankly. And there's actually a report that came out from Gartner earlier in the week talking about this whole cloud access security broker space and some of the benefits that it's bringing to the cloud environment. And they point to this as being somewhat of a driver for these capabilities, because people want to use the cloud to put this kind of non-traditional information, these non-traditional use cases out there. And because of that, now more regulated data is starting to make its way to the cloud, and these cloud brokers, these cloud security technologies are the path to allowing that to happen. So in this first example, a customer of ours has created a portal within Salesforce that allows patients and clinicians and the device manufacturer themselves of a diabetes monitoring harness to be able to access real-time information that's being fed up from telemetry and SIM chips on the device. So the patient information that needs to be kept confidential is actually stored local in the Perspecsys gateway, and then people have access to this cloud portal via the gateway solution. Another one, kind of somewhat similar, but this one's more about scans and MRI and X-ray sort of information. And there's a solution that's out there where our gateway is a part of it that basically allows, again, this sort of medical information that is regulated to be kept local, but multiple constituencies, multiple physician groups that need to collaborate on patient diagnostics are able to access the portal via the Perspecsys gateway, and they can bring the information back in the clear. But actually, if you went in Salesforce, you would find that all this information is then either encrypted or tokenized. So, for instance, on the scan there of the human skull, that's actually just a pointer file in Salesforce, and it's only when that pointer file comes down to the gateway does Perspecsys retrieve the original image and present it back to the physician for them to analyze. Another example, a little bit closer to home, for the patient, you need to do claims processing. A lot of your own medical information being put out in the cloud environment. Some of the organizations that are building out solutions on Salesforce and Force.com want to be able to show their clients that some of this information is not being put out in the cloud. So we're actually doing the same thing here, where there's a gateway that kind of fronts a customer service portal, and Perspecsys is ensuring that documents that are regulated or patient information that needs to be kept out of the cloud is being intercepted in the gateway and replaced with tokens or encrypted values. Last one I just want to dive into a bit to let folks know that it's not an all or nothing proposition. Is a loan originations platform. Again, this is built out on Force.com. And in this particular situation, and this lender has now deployed this in Australia and also the EU. The privacy and governance team, going back to those 3 steps I described earlier, the first step is to determine, okay, what information needs to be protected. And they went through the process of analyzing the data that's involved with the origination of a loan, and there it is in all of its glory on this slide. But when they went through the details, what they determined was that there's just a subset of that information that needs to be protected. So in that example that I shared before, the name David Stott, the account owner, that went through in the clear, but a lot of the other information was either encrypted or tokenized. Here in this particular example, again, just 28 fields needed to be either tokenized or encrypted. So those fields are in red, and those were the ones that either the group felt like from their own security posture they wanted to hang on to their ultimate control of that information, or for instance in the AU they could have felt like APRA, which is the governing body down there, had specified that certain data fields needed to stay in Australia. So that sort of analysis goes into determining what fields need to be protected. And then and this is actually kind of an internal view. As I was coming into look at the information in the middle column, if I'm an end user who's authorized, I can see all the data. Of course, it'd be formatted differently. But on the right-hand side, if somebody's coming natively into the cloud application, they would see a series of replacement tokens, or the information, if it wasn't one of the 28 fields, would be in the clear. The last example, and then I'll hand back to Stephanie to just do a quick review. This one, for those that are more on the managed service side, we're supporting some of those folks that are trying to move to a cloud-based application called ServiceNow, which is IT service management. And the example here shows on the lower or the bottom portion of the screen, the left-hand side, this is somebody who's a managed service provider. The company on the right-hand side, here it is, they've outsourced their IT infrastructure to the provider, the managed IT service provider, but they have some concerns about some of their information, let's say trouble ticket information going out into a cloud environment. So the managed IT service provider wants to move to something like a ServiceNow versus, let's say, an on-premise remedy system because of the multiple benefits of a cloud-based solution. But how would they prove to this customer who has some concerns about their information going into the cloud that the information will be treated in the proper way? So they deployed Perspecsys to be able to allow trouble ticket information to be routed first inside of the firewall of the managed service provider, and then the data protection policies are applied. So then what goes out to the cloud environment for ServiceNow will be the information that's in the clear, because it's not sensitive, it's fine, but then the other information that has been either encrypted or tokenized remains inside of the firewall of the managed IT service provider. And then at that point, the internal customer service rep, he or she has access to that information. They can see it in all of its richness. So they can start the process of working with the end user, at the client, number one, as if the information was truly out there in the first place. So it's solutions like this that these gateways provide that allow organizations like these managed IT service providers to move to the cloud when customers have concerns about, okay, where's my information going to be and who can have access to it. Those issues didn't exist in the on-premise world, but as these guys think about moving to cloud solutions, they come to the forefront. So I think, Stephanie, that's my last slide. So I'm going to hand back to you just to close out, and we can open up any questions that people might want.
Great. Thanks, Gerry, and thanks, Ernie. So just a quick review of the key takeaways from today. First, we hope you gained a better understanding of what cloud data protection gateways are. We hope you learned steps and safeguards to implement when implementing a public cloud. And last, have a better understanding on how to leverage cloud data protection gateways. So now we're going to open it up for question and answer. If you just want to enter your questions in the box on the screen, we'll get to as many as we can in the last 5 or so minutes. So Ernie, this first one's for you. Does a cloud data protection gateway eliminate the need for other security mechanisms?
It depends upon the compliance of security policy. It could, in fact, be the end state, but again, it's dependent upon industry. It's dependent upon internal controls. It is also dependent upon industry controls. So that's my best answer I can give you. So if you wanted to drill down into detail around your industry, compliance, et cetera, I could give you a more specific answer.
Yeah, I'd agree with Ernie there. A lot of it is going to be sector-based, sector-specific, and then company-specific. As Ernie mentioned, a lot of these drivers have to do with internal security policies. But in general, what I have found is that people look at these gateways, as we've described them, as a key part of a kind of a control proposition. And these gateways are great for controlling kind of data location. And then, for folks that know the CASB space, there's a set of technologies like identity and access management bridges and SSO technologies that are key for controlling access, right? So a key part of our value proposition is to try to make sure, realize what we're good at, and then, there's an area that we've built solutions for, but then, there's a host of security ecosystem vendors that we feel like, are complementary to us that we interface with, whether they be secure web gateways or DLP or single sign-on, et cetera. So.
Great, thanks. Yeah. So this one can go to either Gerry or Ernie. How does tokenization differ from encryption?
I guess, Ernie, from my perspective, what I've seen, I joined Perspecsys out of the payment space, kind of a payment gateway company. And tokenization, folks that have been seeing in the Apple announcement, tokenization is really more in the headlines these days. It's something that's kind of new and cool, but it's been involved in the payments world for quite some time, mostly around helping to secure data at rest. But now, given what I described, it can be used for data in motion as well. But what I found is that the answer is somewhat it depends, because some forms of tokenization are sort of warmed over encryption in the sense that there's still a mathematical link. And some of the PCI documents talks about different ways to generate a token. So sometimes they're somewhat similar, but then sometimes, especially if there's the approach taken where there's not a mathematical link between the token and the original value, that's when there's a real difference in my mind versus the encryption. And then encryption also brings with it a lot of overhead associated with key management, et cetera, which is why you want a really nice key management system if you're deploying encryption.
And to that point, for me, it's really about the payload. So the payload for tokenization versus the payload for encryption can dramatically improve performance or degrade performance, as well as the key management, managing through the token and the ability to be able to quote-unquote shorten the token, reduce the payload, improve the scale, reduce the latency, and improve performance is typically my best approach.
Great. Next question. How does a company get started on implementing a cloud data protection gateway?
Well, it's very simple, quite honestly. So obviously, Tech Mahindra on this webinar is a partner with Perspecsys. What you should do is you should have, if you're in the dev world, you're developing custom applications as opposed to buying out of the box. If you're buying something out of the box, it's extremely simple. You can set up a development org, like for example around Salesforce.com, and you can actually run Perspecsys against that development org, and you can learn best practices. You can sample data. You can see the issues around tokenization versus encryption in real time. You can attempt both. You can look at how to connect via multiple instances of applications if you're going across your enterprise. And so the best way to start is to contact Tech Mahindra or contact Perspecsys directly. Ask us what you're really interested in, what your requirements are, and we'd be glad to spend the time to have a conversation about how you would start.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, great. Well, that's all the time we have for questions today. There's a couple more, and we'll make sure to address those offline. Really appreciate everyone joining the webcast. Just a reminder, you will receive a copy of the presentation and the recording within 2 business days. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.